Hello and welcome to this demo video for the ENG 1D course. In this video, we're going to be talking about how to find the main idea and supporting details of an article. And as our example or piece, we are going to be looking at Teen Readers Aren't in Crisis, They're Just Making Their Own Rules by Elizabeth Minkle. And this is from theguardian.com. So Elizabeth Minkle is actually responding to an article in the New Yorker by David Denby. And David Denby wrote a piece where he somewhat attacked teens for what, as he called, being glued to a screen. And he doesn't believe that teenagers or students are actually engaging in good reading. And so what she wants to do is she wants to suggest to him they are engaging in reading, but we don't, as adults, we don't necessarily see it as the most appropriate way of reading, but we're not giving students enough chance and enough credibility, in fact. She references down at the very end of her article where she talks about her opinion suggests that all kids are all right. Their language may be different, their ways of consuming words might be different, but don't doubt for a second that they aren't reading as they stare at those screens and that they aren't loving every word of it. So her suggestion and her main idea is that students are reading, but we have to be open to the idea that students read in a different way, and we have to be thinking about how we are going to engage students in a way that's relatable. And some of her supporting details, she talks about the fact that students are engaging, according to his article, he's talking about the students are engaging in science fiction and fantasy reading, graphic novels, and young adult literature, which is good, but to him that isn't good enough. He's suggesting that students ignore Shakespeare, Twain, and Salinger. Well, unfortunately, her argument and her supporting details suggest that when we want students to read Shakespeare, Twain, and Salinger, we're actually giving texts that are not relatable because they are from a different era. But also, the main part of this is that students' voices aren't represented. Only 2 of them are women, and that none are people of color. There's no gay or transgender voice. And so when we look at these texts, many students find it difficult to connect and therefore are disinterested in these. And so she's suggesting, as one of her supporting details, that the typical canon of literature, as it's called, is not effective and is not motivating for students, and therefore they don't engage in that kind of reading. And that's okay, because when we look at those texts, people need to be able to hear and see themselves within texts. So she is also suggesting that within his article, he's talking about that reading on a digital device is not actually reading, and she tries to refute that argument. And so the way she does that is she then references the idea of Wattpad. And Wattpad's a website that within that, or a mobile reading app, what it allows you to do is engage with a whole bunch of different texts, but also all kinds of users on there who are writing their own fiction and nonfiction. And so what she's suggesting is that it's not fair to judge students and say they're not engaging in reading when they're staring at their phones, in his words. But in fact, we need to be looking at what students are actually looking at. And Wattpad does have classics on there, like The Great Gatsby, which is considered part of the canon. And within that, that students are actually being opened up and introduced to some more classic literature through Wattpad, because students from there see suggestions from their peers as to what they should read next. The other thing she said, technology she uses as an example is Tumblr. And Tumblr allows students to engage in the idea of fandom, which is a very, very current and relevant element of the Western population at the moment, where students are sharing them through the idea of GIFs, where within that they are actually looking at very classic literature. Pride and Prejudice is a classic text, and So within that if that comes in at number 9, students are being opened up to classic literature, but they're doing it in a digital space and with fellow peers in a way that's very common and relatable for many students. The other thing she suggests is that another way it's changed is that students are going to things like conventions, like BookCon, and within that, they are engaging face to face, and cheering and engaging with writers. And so they are reading and that they're loving what they're reading, but they show it in a very different way. And so, even though students might not be enjoying what they're assigned to read in class, her argument is that students are actually reading quite a bit. But we need to make sure that what we're doing is that we're looking for diverse authors, that we're looking at more genres than just the classics, and that we need to be more open minded about how we're engaging in these kinds of texts. And so, within that, she's really quite strongly suggesting that students are reading. We just have to be more open minded as to how we see it happening in the world. Thank you.